What therapies or therapeutic protocols can support and help our PDA children and teens? This is a question I get very often on social media, on email, in my paradigm shift program, and it's something that I always hesitate to answer publicly because I think there's always a cost to therapy that we need to be aware of, and we need to understand the potential benefit. But today I want to be completely transparent and open with my own journey with my PDA son, with one particular therapy that has been transformational for our family. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that story and some of the bigger picture lessons we can learn from that when we're thinking about the question and our decision making around therapy in general, like occupational therapy or neurofeedback or speech language pathology, etc., or play therapy. Okay, so I hope this helps to illustrate some themes. I hope it helps you make some decisions. And I also hope it gives you structure and clarity to think about any type of therapy that you are planning to experiment with your unique PDA child or teen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about today what's called the Safe and Sound Protocol, which is a listening therapy that we have done 6 times in our family. So I've done it 3 times with my PDA son. I've done it twice myself, and I'm doing it currently with my 5.5-year-old. And it's actually the therapeutic protocol doing it that brought me to Polyvagal Theory, which is the most up-to-date theory on how the nervous system works, and how I ended up bringing in Polyvagal Theory to my understanding of PDA. So I'm excited to talk about it. So what is the Safe and Sound Protocol? I'm going to talk about the science after I tell you the story, but I want to just give you the basics. So it is a 5-day protocol where a child or an adult listens to gated music. Means it's like either classical, pop music, or for little kids, Disney music that's gated with specific frequencies that tune into the inner ear and can actually tone the inner ear. And I'll talk about why that matters in a second. And so operationally, now what you can do is you can actually have an app, and with an occupational therapist or a social worker or a speech language pathologist who's been trained in this modality, you can do it in the home and have them listen for 5 days while you're attuning to them and giving them nonverbal signals of safety to their nervous system through play and engagement. Okay, so we did this almost 5 years ago with my son when we first moved to Michigan from Washington, D.C., and my amazing occupational therapist suggested it, and I had never heard of it, and I had never heard of Polyvagal Theory. But she said that this was supportive of trauma and severe anxiety. And at that time, I didn't even know my son was PDA. And so I was like, yeah, let's give it a try, because what I saw from him and his feral animal behavior at home and the fear when I tried to soothe him looked to me like a trauma response. So I was like, yes, I think this could be a good fit. And caveat and side note, we've also tried therapies that did not help and actually activated him more. I'm not going to go deep into that, but I want you guys to be aware of, like, I've had a lot of trial and error with this and experimentation, and I'm trying to support you to make good decisions for your family. So we, at that time, rented the headphones and the little pack that you used to have. It's now an app. And basically the instructions were, okay, we don't want his heart rate to raise too much as he's listening to the music, the Disney music, because that could imitate symptoms of an activated nervous system. So you don't want to be like running around and jumping on the trampoline and swinging while you're doing this. And I was like, okay, that's going to be a tricky one because my son is constantly in motion. Okay. The second thing is I wasn't supposed to talk to him, which was going to be another tricky thing because he was only 4.5. And I was like, how am I going to do this? He was so manic at the time, I was convinced that I wouldn't even be able to engage him for more than like 5 or 10 minutes. in something that wasn't like me jumping him on the trampoline or swinging him or involved a screen. So I was like, this is a big challenge. The other thing is the occupational therapist said, you know, there shouldn't be any interruptions, disruptions, entries of other people. So my husband or my other child, because it can like startle the nervous system. And so I really had to plan for these 5 days. And what I ended up doing was I thought about his special interests, which were like dogs and Christmas at the time. And so for each day, I set up stations of brand new art supplies, and I bought all of these magazines with pictures of dogs and Christmas, and we had like scissors, and we had like a sensory station that I set up every day, and then I had like one other thing, right? And I also was told like they can't be chewing or eating because it's going to make noises or distract from the music that's supposed to be going into their inner ear. And that one also was a very tricky one for me because he used a pacifier until he was 8, and he was a constant oral regulator, like many PDAers who, you know, want those crunchy snacks all the time or are chewing on things or need a pacifier. And so I did decide to allow eating and allowed him to have a sucker, which was against the protocol, but I was really motivated to make it as accessible for him as possible. Okay, so we did this every day, and it was a big push, and I actually wrote an article about it 3 years ago on my first website, PDA Parents, which feel free to look at. I did a review of the protocol. So what I saw from my son is that about 3 days in, he started to interact with me and engage with me in a way that I had not seen. So he was like, Mama, let's go outside. And this was like in the evening. Let's go outside and do karate together. And he would like kick and want to show me his karate moves. And for me, this was like a watershed moment because he didn't initiate play. He didn't really ideate or have ideas of his own. And he didn't really leave the house or want to do anything because he was in burnout. And so I was like, oh my gosh, yes, of course I'll go outside in the dark and like play karate and do jumps with you. And I was like so excited. Okay. Then I started to hear him when I would put him to bed at night. I would hear him crying, which for many of you, you might be thinking, oh, that's not a good thing. But for me, it was like, oh my gosh, he's feeling emotion, because all he had expressed for about a year was screaming and pain and fear. And so to have him crying upstairs, it was like he was actually processing emotion. And so we would talk to him, be like, you know, I see that you're crying, like what's going on? And he would actually express things like, I miss my friends, because we had moved from the Washington, D.C. area to Michigan just 2 months prior. And another pattern that I noticed, and the occupational therapist had told me about this, which was he may need to do heavy work after each evening of doing this listening protocol. So for those of you who are just joining, I'm talking about the Safe and Sound protocol, which is based on Polyvagal Theory. And so we would fill laundry baskets with a bunch of books, and he would push them back and forth across our living room wooden floors, which didn't have that much furniture because we had just moved there. So it lasted a couple weeks, these small advances, and then it sort of went back to where he was in burnout. So it wasn't a permanent change. However, it was an extraordinarily profound experience for me as a mother for 2 reasons. One, I saw the boy behind the threat response. I saw what was behind his fight or flight response, and it was a little boy who was four and a half, wanting to do karate, wanting to show me things, and wanting to be with his friends that he had left. And when we left Washington, D.C., I didn't even think he processed or cared about his friends because he just didn't express emotion or communicate verbally very much. And so for me, I had this light at the end of the tunnel that I located and could trust. And I was like, okay, like, he is not a bad kid. He is in fight or flight all the time. It is a threat response. This is not him. And there is hope. Like, there is a kid behind there. And I know for some of you, if you have extraordinarily violent, aggressive, difficult, equalizing children, it can be hard to keep that faith that the child is in there and good, okay? The second thing that it demonstrated to me was, oh my gosh, this is a nervous system based issue, okay? Because this is pre-PDA awareness or understanding. So this experience with the Safe and Sound protocol was a very transformative thing for our family, even though the effects wore off. So we did it one more time with Cooper in the traditional way. And then last summer, he and I did a week in Colorado with an occupational therapist in nature and on a farm. Both of us did the Safe and Sound protocol for attachment. And this time it was much more flexible. You know, we played card games with the occupational therapist. We talked to the chickens. We walked to the river and looked for fish. And so I wasn't as worried about his heart rate or surprises or whether or not we were talking or having snacks. Okay, so this also demonstrated to me ways we can be flexible and adjust this protocol for a PDA. Okay, I've done it for myself, for my own trauma healing, and it was very profound. And then right now I'm doing it with my 5.5-year-old, 10 minutes a night of play, doing the listening protocol of the Safe and Sound, in order to support my younger son, his siblings' anxiety and some of his trauma from the experience of years with a PDA sibling who is quite violent and aggressive towards him. So how does the Safe and Sound protocol work? Okay, so the place that, in addition to, working through the protocol in my home, if you look at the Pocket Guide to Polyvagal Theory, The Transformative Power of Feeling Safe by Dr. Stephen Porges, who is the father of Polyvagal Theory, they explain exactly what is happening in the body and in the inner ear with the Safe and Sound protocol. So I'm going to give you a very surface level scientific description in order to understand what is happening when the kid is listening to this music or when you're listening to this music. Okay, so it's working specifically on the inner ear, and it's important to distinguish between hearing, do you have a hearing problem, or listening? What is your ear? What type of sounds and frequencies is your ear tuning into? Okay, so let's take an example. Let's say I am walking in an unsafe area of a foreign country by myself as a woman, standing out very clearly that I'm not from that country. And it's, I'm using an example from when I did field work as a doctorate student in Colombia. So my listening is going to be very attuned and hypervigilant to the sounds that would indicate threat potentially. And those sounds or frequencies are lower tone sounds like footsteps or male voices, those lower frequencies. Okay, so when I'm walking, I'm going to have that hypervigilance in my ear, in my inner ear, because my nervous system is telling me you need to be tuning in to potential threat. Okay, but if I'm walking in my neighborhood with my husband in a safe area in my small rural town in Michigan, I don't have to be attuned to those lower levels frequencies and sounds and male voices. I'm going to be able to tune into his specific voice and the prosody of his voice. And that's going to signal to my nervous system I can be in ventral vagal or safe and social. So the human voice and the prosody of the human voice, meaning that rhythmic sort of sing-songy sound, is one of the signals to the nervous system, mammal to mammal, that you're safe. So with kids and humans who are traumatized and or neurodivergent, autistic, I certainly think PDA, there is an inner ear that is constantly attuning to potential threat and not to the human voice. Okay, so what the Safe and Sound protocol does is it tones that inner ear so that it is more capable of tuning into the frequencies and pitches of what is regulating to the nervous system. So it's allowing for more ventral vagal. Okay, so if you want to know more about the science, I would read Polyvagal Theory. I'm not going to go much deeper into it. Okay, but understanding how it worked is also what led me to Polyvagal Theory and doing a certificate in Polyvagal Theory with the Polyvagal Institute to bring this understanding to you guys who are interested in learning how to support your PDA kids and teens. Okay, so what tips can we bring to our families and our decision making when we're thinking about doing the Safe and Sound protocol and or another therapy, right? So I'm going to speak with examples of the Safe and Sound protocol, but these 7 things I'm going to mention to you are ideas or concepts you can apply to any therapy that you are considering. So whether it's occupational therapy, speech language therapy, play therapy, etc. Okay, so the first thing, the reason I don't talk very much publicly about therapy is because I understand 100% how it feels as a parent to be in a situation where your kid is like totally out of control, explosive, aggressive, can't attend school, and like the only thing you want to do is fix it, right? Like just give me the theory, tell me what to do, I'll hire the person, make it stop. Like I get that. I went through that. However, often with PDA kids who are near their threshold of cumulative nervous system activation or kids and teens who are in burnout, if we push therapy and they don't have autonomy around it, we're going to push them further into burnout. This is regardless of modality, right? So it could be a great protocol. It could be an awesome occupational therapist. It could be the best idea theoretically. However, we always want to be thinking first through the lens of what actually activates the PDA nervous system, which is the perception that there's not a choice or that there's pressure or that there's an agenda, right? So anytime we're pushing them to do something like the Safe and Sound protocol, any benefits that they would have from the protocol are outweighed by the perception of threat that comes from us not giving them autonomy or equality to actually choose if they want to participate. And this feels like a catch-22. So we can bring a tool, which I teach in the Paradigm Shift program, called cost-benefit decision-making within constraints, to understand how to make these decisions. The first thing I would say is we want to err on the side of lowering overall nervous system activation for the child and establishing trust before we push any therapies. And actually, we want to not push therapies, but rather offer them from a place of connection, right? So the biggest place that I see parents get stuck with the idea of therapy is this, and that's why I'm emphasizing it, because we want to fix and we want to support and we want to help, and I have been there, but in doing so, we may be introducing a higher cost to our child or teen's nervous system than the benefit of like sensory regulation in an occupational therapy setting, right? And so we really want to think about the timing. We really want to think about the cost benefit, and we really want to prioritize felt safety, relationship, and understanding how deep in burnout they are. And paradoxically, the deeper in burnout, the more resistant they are, the less effective therapies are going to be, because their nervous system is resisting and avoiding because they're in their survival brain. Okay, so that concept, the very first one, the cost-benefit decision-making, you can apply to any therapy, not just the Safe and Sound protocol. Okay, the second is a concept I think that's important for any therapy you choose, which is the necessity of adjusting the protocol or the therapeutic modality for the PDAer. Okay, so in the example of the Safe and Sound protocol, let me just give you some examples that in the ways that we adjusted it. And if you are considering the SSP, you can share this podcast episode with the therapist you're working with. Okay, so for example, the Safe and Sound protocol is working on the inner ear. So obviously it's not ideal if the child is chewing or talking or sucking, because then it's going to like create noise in the bones that attach to the inner ear. Not ideal. However, through the cost-benefit lens, if allowing a pacifier, or if allowing a Tootsie Pop, or if allowing some talking is what facilitates access to the protocol itself, yes, it's not an ideal situation, but through the cost-benefit lens, I believe the benefit still outweighs the cost, right? Like, it doesn't negate entirely the therapy. It just might not be like as clinically significant, or, like as it would be studied in a clinical setting. So, allowing oral regulation, allowing some talking if the child is initiating it or needs that scaffolding. Maybe not allowing like jumping on the trampoline or running to escalate that heart rate, but like not making them sit at a table like I did with my younger son when I first did the protocol, like by the book, right? So like perhaps being in nature or being in a place that they want to be, or moving throughout the house. So right now, as I'm doing it with my 5.5-year-old, like sometimes he wants to play with Legos for 10 minutes, but sometimes he just wants to get in bed and like get cozy with me and chat. And so I just do that, and it's fine. Right? And then other parents who have done this have, their child resists the headphones. They're bought into the Safe and Sound protocol, but they might not be able to use the headphones because of sensory issues, or the resistance around the expectation of the headphones sets off the nervous system. So, listening in the car on the way to school for 3 minutes, or, putting it on your phone so that it's not necessarily perfectly going into their inner ear, but there's still the music in the background. So the point here is that we have to get creative when we're working with PDAers, because remembering that one of the key root causes of their perception or neuroception of threat is us trying to control everything and like make them do things. So the more we can relax that in a therapeutic setting, the better, right? And, we applied this logic when we did neurofeedback as well for trauma, where, we sort of broke the rules and did it our own way to get as much therapeutic benefit as possible while not activating our son to the point where he couldn't access it. Okay, the third thing is you want to prepare and look through the PDA lens. So like, I knew that my son couldn't sustain attention very easily, and he was sort of manic and in constant motion. But when can he engage? If it's a special interest, if it's my safe nervous system, or if there is a sensory intense experience. So I added into the Safe and Sound, like all the pictures of dogs and like the Christmas ornaments and the things that he was interested in, and the transformation activities with the paints, and then I had Orbeads, and I had different sensory things set up for him. The fourth thing, and I don't know how true this is for every therapy, but I know it to be true about the Safe and Sound protocol, is that there will be some sensitization of the nervous system during this protocol. Okay, so when I mentioned earlier in this teaching that my son needed to do heavy work and was also crying at night afterwards, this was his nervous system resetting and becoming more sensitized. So this is true for adults too. Like when if we have sensitive nervous systems and we're doing like EMDR, or we're doing Safe and Sound protocol, there will be sensitization, right? So for example, when I did the Safe and Sound protocol myself, I started tuning into more sounds at higher frequencies, which was somewhat distressing for me at first, because it was like my sensory experience got more intensified. And when I came back from doing a week in Colorado for the attachment, with my PDA son, I needed to take another week off of work to recover because I was dysregulated from doing all that nervous system work. So we have neurodivergent children, and so they have nervous systems that are sensitive. If they're PDA, that's the root cause of their challenges. So this is not to be like considered lightly, I guess I'm saying. Number 5, this is not a magic bullet. No therapy, including the SSP, is a magic bullet. I don't believe in magic bullets. And the way that I think about things is like, if this could support a 2 to 3% shift in his well-being, then it's worth it. And that's the way I thought about a service dog. That's the way I thought about medication. That's the way I think about occupational therapy and the other things we've experimented with. Because 2 to 3% shifts, or even 1% shifts over time, build up and shift the ability to collaborate and have trust and access the thinking brain for your child. So we also want to understand that we have to, when we're thinking about therapy, understand the correct root cause of the behavior, right? So if you're at occupational therapy and focusing a lot on skills or on like sensory integration skills, but the dysregulation is coming from the neuroception of like, I don't have a choice around what I'm doing, that could actually backfire. Okay, number 6. You have to decide. You have to decide. So like, I never want you to take what I'm saying and be like, well, Casey told us we should do the safe and sound protocol. What I teach parents is decision making, and I give information to support that. Okay, so for the safe and sound protocol, for example, I know more than a handful of parents of PDA kids who tried it and it did not help. Okay, it did not help. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be how far the child was in burnout. It could be the way that they approached it, whether or not they adjusted it for the PDA. But again, like, there's other children or teens for whom this has been very helpful, but ultimately, like, you have to be the decision maker and you have to be the one to decide. When we outsource this to others, including to me or therapists, we're giving away our agency and not recognizing that actually we know our child and our situation better than anyone on the internet, in a clinical setting, outside of your family home. Okay? So that is both freedom to choose and also responsibility to choose. So when in doubt, follow your intuition. And your intuition might say like, oh, this is a cool idea, but they're not ready yet. Okay, so it might be a not yet, or it might be, that's not going to work for them. Great, follow it. I'm never here to be like, you should do this. There are no shoulds. Okay, finally, the safe and sound protocol and many therapies can only be accessed with a clinician or a professional. So you want to find a provider that you trust and is not going to judge you for making the adjustments that you need for your family to use the protocol with your PDA child or teen. Okay, so that is the live on one particular therapy, the safe and sound protocol, my experience using it, and 7 lessons that we can take away from that experience and the bird's eye view that I have on it. And now, feel free to ask any questions you have on that particular therapeutic modality, and I will just come back to these questions. Okay, so sillies of yaks. Please, I'd love your take on PCIT. Okay, so that's parent-child interaction therapy. Just to be transparent, I've never done it with my child. However, I have worked in coaching with more than a handful of families, especially with younger children, who engaged in it. And so I have their take on it, and I can bring my logic about how the PDA brain works as to why I think they had that experience. So a lot of the parents with PDA kids who started in PCIT found that the first half of the protocol or modality, where it's like you're establishing trust and connection, went really well. But as soon as you switched into the more behavioral aspect of it, that it went off the rails. And that makes a lot of sense, because often we look at therapy as like, okay, the clinician's going to spend a couple weeks establishing trust and not having an agenda and just like getting to know and observe the person and following their lead. And then they're going to introduce skills and try and change things. And that's what happens in PCIT and many other therapies. However, the most therapeutic thing and the only therapeutic thing, I believe, for a PDA nervous system is felt safety. And as soon as we start having an agenda or pushing skills or doing behavioral interventions, we're doing things that they neurocept as dangerous or life threat. Okay? And it might not make sense if you're a teacher, a therapist, or a parent listening who's new to this, but this is the root cause of the fight, flight, freeze behavior. Is my survival brain is neurocepting that the parent is trying to make me do something, and therefore my nervous system is going to experience a physiological response to that neuroception, even if the kid doesn't cognitively understand it. So even if they comply in the therapy setting, they might be masking. What you'll find with PDA kids and teens is that then it will come out when they get home, right? And you'll start to notice over time cumulative levels of nervous system activation that then increase things like controlling and manipulative behavior, which we could call equalizing, explosive behavior, trouble accessing basic needs, hygiene, toileting, sleeping, eating, and or safety, and connection diminishes. So that's my take on it. However, I will always prioritize a parent's perspective on their connection with their child and what they observe over my theory or logic or what other people I've worked with have experienced, right? I can share that with you and we can develop a hypothesis, but ultimately, like, if you are having a positive experience, then keep doing it. Right? Like, I'm not here to advocate for or against any particular therapy. It's just understanding the logic. Yeah. Yes, all the lives are always saved. Yeah, so Bella is saying for how long every day. So with the Safe and Sound protocol, the traditional structure is 1 hour for 5 consecutive days. However, you can adjust it with your practitioner to do like shorter periods of time over a longer time horizon. So for example, with my 5.5-year-old's occupational therapist, we decided to do 10 minutes a day over the course of a month. So what we do is just 10 minutes before, like, we do our reading and we do our teeth brushing and we do our songs and we do our whole like routine, I come up with him a little bit early and we do those 10 minutes of listening. Yeah. All right, I'm just looking for any more questions. Kids of humans because kids are humans because kids are not humans. Oh, I just say humans because, like, people are like, what about teens? What about people? What about grown-ups? What about my spouse? So I just add humans. Of course I think kids are humans. Don't be silly. Yeah. I get lots of feedback on the internet, so you know how it is. All right, let me see. It doesn't look like there's any more questions, but it was good to see you guys. All right, I will save this live and I will turn it into a podcast, also include on YouTube, so you can catch it later. It was so nice to be with all of you, and I will see you again soon.